When you hear the word consultant, what do you imagine? A polished professional in a sharp suit, armed with buzzwords and PowerPoint slides? Someone whispering advice into the CEO's ear, charging fees that could buy a small yacht? Or maybe you think of scandals. The Enron collapse, where consultants and advisors were right in the thick of the chaos.
December 2nd, 2001. That was the day Enron Corp filed for what at the time was the largest ever corporate bankruptcy.
The opioid crisis, where consultants were accused of shaping strategies that fueled addiction.
There have been more than 165,000 opioid deaths since the start of COVID. Most of those deaths involved synthetic opioids like fentanyl.
Or massive layoffs, where consultants become the executioners, delivering the bad news leaders don't want to face. So, what do consultants really do? The truth lies somewhere between the hero story and the villain narrative. And to really understand consulting, we need to look beyond the cliches, into the shadows, the controversies, and the uncomfortable truths about why organizations bring them in. Let's start with the myth. People think consultants are paid just to state the obvious. They borrow your watch to tell you the time. But the darker reality? Sometimes they're paid to say the thing no one else dares to say, even if it hurts. Or worse, they're paid to create distance between leaders and the fallout of their own decisions. Take mass layoffs. A CEO might know the company is drowning in costs, but instead of facing their employees, they bring in consultants. Suddenly, it's the consultant's recommendation to cut 20% of the workforce. The consultant becomes the scapegoat. The leader gets cover, and the employees carry the pain. Yes, consultants can be mirrors, showing organizations the blind spots they've ignored. But sometimes that mirror reflects something uglier: corruption, toxic culture, unethical practices. I once watched a consulting project uncover a quiet fraud scheme, middle managers siphoning resources into shell companies. Without the outsider's eye, it might never have been caught. But here's the paradox. Other times, consultants themselves are complicit. They know what's happening, but they look away, because speaking out would mean losing the contract. Consultants are translators, yes, but not just of data and strategy. Sometimes they translate scandals into sanitized language. Fraud becomes accounting irregularities. Massive layoffs become workforce optimization. In that sense, consultants don't just decode chaos. They also help leaders reframe reality for shareholders, the press, and the public. And sometimes consultants play therapist. They listen to leaders admit to fears they would never share with their teams. But let's be honest, at times they also become enablers. They nod along while toxic behaviors continue unchecked because confronting it would cost them influence. That's the controversial side of consulting. They can be both the conscience and the accomplice. So, what do consultants really do? They don't just solve problems. Sometimes they absorb blame, expose corruption, enable bad decisions, or shine a light in plain places leaders would rather keep dark. When we peel back the glossy surface, consulting reveals itself as a strange paradox. Consultants are called in to fix, but sometimes they become entangled in the very mess they're meant to clean. Let's break down their roles, the ones that inspire trust and the ones that spark controversy. Consultants are diagnosticians. They study symptoms, identify root causes, and recommend treatment. However, their work sometimes resembles a forensic investigation. Consider a case where a multinational firm brought in consultants to address declining performance. What they uncovered was shocking. Senior leaders had been inflating numbers, hiding losses, and funneling resources into personal accounts. Without consultants digging deep, it might have stayed buried for years. But on the other hand, history shows us cases where consultants were accused of looking the other way, choosing silence over truth to preserve lucrative contracts. So the diagnostician's role isn't always clean. Sometimes it's medicine, sometimes it's a cover-up. Consultants excel at translation. They turn messy data into a clear strategy. They make sense of chaos. But in moments of scandal, they also become spin doctors. An internal scandal of executive misconduct? Reframed as a leadership transition. Mass layoffs that devastate families? Labeled as a strategic restructuring. Bribery accusations in international markets? Packaged as complex compliance challenges. Their skill at translation makes them invaluable, but also dangerous. Because language doesn't just describe reality, it shapes it. And sometimes consultants reshape reality to protect power. One of the noblest roles consultants play is truth-telling. They are outsiders, free of politics, who can say, "This isn't working. Here's why. But neutrality has a darker side. When controversial decisions are made, layoffs, closures, or cuts, consultants are often cast as the villains. Leaders say, "We didn't want this, but the consultants recommended it." This scapegoating protects leadership reputations while consultants absorb the outrage. Sometimes, they willingly play this role because it keeps them in demand. But the ethical line here is blurry. Are they truth-tellers or shields for executives afraid of facing their people? Consultants are catalysts. They spark momentum, permit organizations to act. But catalysts don't always trigger positive change. In some infamous cases, consultants recommended aggressive cost-cutting to satisfy shareholders, leading to layoffs that gutted entire communities. In other cases, they advised on market strategies that prioritized profit over safety, fueling products and policies that later became public scandals. Yes, they can spark innovation and growth, but they can also be the trigger that pulls organizations into controversy, whether intentionally or not. So what roles do consultants really play? They're doctors, translators, truth-tellers, catalysts, but in the shadows they can also be investigators, spin doctors, scapegoats, and sometimes accomplices. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Consulting is not just about solving problems. It's about power, perception, and politics.